Hello! Thank you for viewing the virtual edition of the Houston Metropolitan Research Center's Preservation 101 program. My name is Elizabeth Mayer, and I am the Preservation Librarian for HMRC. Preservation 101 is a program that we host in various formats every year for Preservation Week, which is usually held in the last week of April. The goal of this program is to provide an introductory look at how preservation works for library collections and how individuals can use the same concepts and tools for their own collections and family records. For those who might not be familiar with our work, the Houston Metropolitan Research Center is one of 3 special collections libraries within the Houston Public Library System. Our 2 sister special collections are the African American Library at the Gregory School and the Clayton Center for Genealogical Research. The HMRC was founded in 1976 and is housed in the historic Julia Idison Building, which used to be the Central Houston Public Library location. Our mission is to locate, preserve, and make available to researchers the documentary history of Houston. The HMRC is home to a rather large collection that includes around 5 million photographs, 150,000 architectural drawings, 15,000 rare books and pamphlets donated by John Millsaps, a large collection of rare prints and first editions, over 300 rare maps of Houston and the Southwest, over 1,400 oral histories, and over 1,100 archival collections. So, why is preservation important? And why do we dedicate a week to celebrating and teaching about preservation each year? Within libraries and museums, preservation is the act of working to extend the life of collections beyond their natural time of functional use. We do this in order to maintain a physical record of our ancient and recent history, but we also do this so that these physical records continue to be accessible to researchers for generations. We celebrate Preservation Week every year to bring awareness to the work that libraries, archives, and museums do to keep their collections in good condition, as well as to help the public find ways to care for their own collections at home. Preservation and conservation share many similarities in their methods, but there are a few important distinctions between the two. The first is the scope. The scope of preservation is very wide-reaching. Preservation professionals work with whole collections, charting trends and environmental changes in order to keep collections as a whole in good condition, while the scope of conservation tends to focus specifically on individual items. The second difference between preservation and conservation are the goals of the two methodologies. The goal of preservation is to prevent damage to collections, whereas the goal of conservation is to mend or reverse damage to collections. A major part of preservation is understanding the life cycle of collections made from organic materials. For example, paper is frequently made of wood pulp or rag pulp, which has a natural timeline in which it begins to deteriorate. The goal of preservation is to stabilize and extend the life of collections to the greatest possible extent. We achieve this goal by understanding the natural rate of deterioration for collections and how environmental factors could either slow down or significantly speed up the rate of deterioration. In this section, we'll be exploring the environmental factors that have the most direct impact on collections, what environmental conditions are best for maintaining collections, and how we can start to mitigate the natural risk of deterioration that comes from environmental factors. One of the greatest environmental factors that can affect books, photographs, documents, and other common collection materials is temperature. Paper materials kept in too high of a temperature could be at risk of severe chemical deterioration. As mentioned earlier, paper materials have a natural rate of deterioration in which the paper becomes much more brittle and fragile. Heat can speed up this process and cause paper to become brittle much sooner than it normally would. Temperatures that fluctuate too severely or too often can cause severe physical deterioration to collections. Paper can become increasingly brittle, and materials like photographs can begin to crack and delaminate. Archives and special collections libraries sometimes keep their collections at 60 plus or minus about 2 degrees or lower for the most idealized storage condition for materials. A good temperature to aim for with your own collections to keep items stable would be 70, give or take 2 degrees, which would be room temperature. Like temperature, humidity can have a significant environmental impact on collections, books and paper collections in particular. Also, like temperature, it's important to have humidity that is stable and consistent. If humidity is too low, this can lead to materials drying and cracking. And if humidity is too high, this can lead to paper swelling, cockling, and warping as a result from absorbing all of the moisture in the air. High humidity, especially when coupled with high temperature, can lead to potential mold growth, which can severely damage books and paper collections. Significant spikes in humidity for long stretches of time could significantly shorten the lifespan of paper. The ideal humidity to keep collections at is 50 plus or minus 5%. Something that a lot of libraries and archives have been doing to prevent damage to collections is to control how much light exposure the materials are getting each day. Here at HMRC, all of the lights are set to operate on a motion sensor. That way, the only time the lights are on in the archives is when a librarian comes to collect or reshelve an item. Photos and paintings in particular are susceptible to light damage. UV light radiation can be incredibly damaging to materials, especially considering that light damage is cumulative and irreversible. Too much exposure to light can cause chemical deterioration in paper and photographic materials. This can cause materials to discolor and fade significantly. This is why, in museum displays, lighting is considered carefully by angle, light intensity, and the amount of time a painting is exposed to the light. One of the best and simplest ways to preserve your own papers and photos is to make sure that these materials are kept away from too strong of a light source, whether that's natural sunlight through doors and windows, or incandescent or fluorescent lighting that can be found indoors. Keeping materials covered or in a dark room will help to extend their time of use. In a general sense, the older an item is, the more fragile it becomes. As I mentioned earlier, as books and paper begin to age, they naturally become more brittle. Once embrittlement begins to set in, paper is much more likely to break apart if handled roughly. While there are chemical treatments that can be done to help reverse some of the effects of embrittlement on paper, it is recommended that only professional conservators use these methods. Otherwise, it is best recommended that items that become fragile should be kept in special housing, whether that's an acid-free folder for flat objects or special fit boxes for books that keep the items from shifting around too much, while also keeping out other environmental factors. Preventing pest infestations is an ongoing battle for libraries and archives. There are several species of insects that are common in the United States that eat paper, wood, leather, and other materials that are commonly found in library collections. A few of these species include book lice, silverfish, and various types of beetles and cockroaches. We keep the Julia Idison building well protected from pest infestations, and one way that we help to prevent pests from being brought into the library is that we quarantine incoming collections. We search boxes of incoming materials to see if there are any signs of insect damage, including chewed and torn paper, dead insects, and other debris. Some ways that you can help prevent pest infestations in your home collections is to control the environment in which you store your books and paper. Keeping food and drinks away from where you keep your collections will help prevent pests from being drawn in. It is also recommended to not keep collection materials, and especially any paper materials, in outdoor spaces such as a garage, as these areas can be a little too open to the elements. Contaminants are any new materials introduced to book and paper collections that could cause damage or accelerate deterioration. These can include organic matter such as hair and skin cells, natural oils from your hands, plant pollen, soot, or natural gases, or new chemical matter including chemical solvents and various adhesives such as tapes or glue. A common mistake that people can make when trying to take care of their book and paper collections is to use Scotch tape or similar pressure-sensitive tapes to repair tears. Unfortunately, many pressure-sensitive tapes are acidic and they start to increase the rate of deterioration for paper. It is also incredibly difficult to remove them from the paper, and attempting to do so can lead to significant losses on the original paper. While it is often recommended to work with a professional conservator to repair any damage you might have to books and paper, there are some safer tape options available at art supply or archival supply stores for repairing small tears that are acid-free and safer to remove from the paper. For other repairs, if a cover is torn off of a book, for example, using linen tape to tie and hold the book together is a good solution. Fire can be incredibly damaging to collections. The damage is far encompassing and includes much more than the initial damage done by flames, which can burn and melt away collections. Soot and smoke left behind from fire can accelerate the aging of collections. As you can see in this example photo here, the burned edges of the paper are incredibly brittle, so even gentle cleaning could risk breaking the paper. Any water used to douse the flames could also potentially bring in library pests or create a humid and moist enough environment for mold to begin to form. For burned items, it is definitely recommended to contact remediation professionals. Last but certainly not least, water damage in collections can be incredibly devastating and difficult to reverse. Imagine the damage caused by too much exposure to humidity, and then increase that damage significantly, and that is the scope of what water damage can do to collections. Water damage can cause major physical damage to books and paper, distort the chemicals in photographic materials, cause discoloration, it can bleed or smear any materials that are handwritten in ink, and possibly lead to an outbreak of mold. Water damage can come from a number of sources, including leaky roofs or pipes, accidents with food or water near collections, or natural disasters such as flooding or hurricanes. Keeping any paper-based materials up high on a shelf will greatly lessen the chance that these materials are affected by a leak or a flood. If a small amount of paper materials are affected by water damage, it is recommended to either air dry the items by interleaving the pages with paper towels or freeze dry the items in a frost-free freezer over a number of weeks. For any large-scale water damage, it is best to contact professional services for treatment and remediation. The second half of this program will be a series of handling tips covering the various do's and don'ts of handling different collection materials, as well as some general tips for displaying home collections. I'll begin by talking about books. When shelving books, it is important to shelve them by size, making sure they are upright and not leaning to the side, using a bookend for support if needed. For larger books, it may be helpful to store them flat, as finding a shelf to accommodate their height may be difficult. When storing larger books flat, be sure to arrange the books by size and weight so that the heaviest volumes are placed on the bottom. When packing books away, either for storage or moving, always make sure that the spine of the book is facing down. When books are stored with the spine facing up, gravity will start to pull the pages away from the cover of the book. When grabbing a book off the shelf, it is important not to grab the books by the head cap, which can be found at the top of the spine. This puts a lot of pressure on the book and can cause damage over time. Instead, it is best to push the books to either side of the book that you want and grab the book by the center of the spine instead. Finally, when marking your place in a book, please use a bookmark or other small item to mark your place. Dog earing or folding down the corners of your books will cause the paper to break down. Leaving a post-it note in the book can cause damage to the paper with its adhesive, and leaving a book open and face down can cause the spine of the book to break. Therefore, it is best to simply use a bookmark. If you have a lot of documents that you are storing, such as personal papers, medical records, business records, or education records, it is best to store them upright and in file folders and boxes. If storing documents upright isn't an option, storing materials flat in folders is acceptable as well. Folders are preferred over materials such as envelopes because envelopes can cause damage to documents over time when inserting or removing items. When purchasing folders and boxes, make sure that the materials are acid-free, meaning that they have a pH of 7.0 or higher, and lignin-free, meaning that the lignin content is 1% or less. It's important to note that many materials mark themselves as archival or archival safe, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee that they are acid-free, so be sure to check packaging for a label marking the material as acid-free and lignin-free. Ensure that any documents in your collection are exposed to as little light as possible while in storage, so always opt for a cool, dry, dark place for storage locations. Also, if you are keeping older documents, try to remove as many harmful materials as possible, including cardboard, rubber bands, and paper clips. When you are handling photographs, it is recommended that you use protective gloves such as nitrile gloves. Photographs in particular are very sensitive to the natural oils on your hands, and wearing gloves will prevent a lot of damage from handling. Similar to the documents discussed earlier, you will want to remove any cardboard, rubber bands, or paper clips from groups of photographs, as these will damage the photographs over time. For storing photos, you will want to house photos in protective enclosures to keep out any gritty dirt or dust which can scratch the surface of the photo. You will also want to avoid using any pressure-sensitive tapes, such as Scotch tape, if you have any torn photographs. Suitable storage materials for photographs are made of either plastic or paper. Paper enclosures should be acid-free, while plastic enclosures should be made of an archival-safe plastic. For plastics, it's helpful to remember the 3 Ps: polyethylene, polyester, or polypropylene. Now, just a note of caution, if you are using plastic, photos can actually stick to plastic surfaces when they are in a high heat environment, so it's important to store your photos in a cool, dry location. Plastic should also not be used for glass plate negatives or nitrate negatives. For oversized items, they should be stored flat whenever possible, not folded or rolled. However, if you do not have the space to store an oversized item flat, then rolling is preferable. When folding paper, you are actually creating a weak point at the crease that will eventually start to degrade as the paper ages. When you roll paper, you are putting an even amount of pressure across the surface of the paper. When you're carrying oversized items, it's also important to support them completely when lifting them. This means that it's best not to grab them at the edges of the paper, but rather keep your hands or any flat surface underneath the entire item as a whole to support as much weight as possible. When storing scrapbooks, it is recommended to interleave the pages with an unbuffered, acid-free paper. Scrapbooks are by nature mixed media, meaning that they are made up of many different materials, each with their own rate of deterioration, all resting in close contact with one another. As you can see in the example photo here, we have a scrapbook page that contains metal pins, photographs, newspaper clippings, and other ephemera. To at least separate some of the materials goes a long way to extending the life of a scrapbook. It is also important to isolate or encapsulate any problem materials, such as sticky items like food or any acidic items. For example, we had a scrapbook that contained an unlit cigarette. This would be a great example of an item that needs to be removed from the scrapbook page, kept in its own housing, with a note that says where in the original scrapbook it was kept. When turning the page of a scrapbook, it is important to support the entire page and not simply hold the edge of the paper, especially if it is weighed down by attached materials. Finally, you don't want to force a scrapbook to lay open flat. Some scrapbooks are bound in a way that they will naturally rest open flat. However, if you are not able to open a scrapbook very far, it is best not to force open the book any further than it naturally will go. If you would like to put any of your collections out on display, there are a few tips to keep in mind. In general, interior rooms have a more stable environment than those with outside walls. It's best to avoid hanging any framed works of art or any framed objects on outside walls. However, if you can use a spacer in between the frame and the wall, this will help to protect the item on display. You will also want to avoid displaying any materials above or immediately adjacent to any sources of heat, such as heat vents, radiators, or fireplaces. Finally, one way to avoid a lot of environmental concerns is to create a display copy of whatever item that you would like to put out on display. By creating a copy, you will actually have a visual representation of the item that you can use for display, while the original item is kept safely in storage. Thank you all for watching this Houston Public Library presentation. If you would like to learn more about upcoming programs at the library, you can subscribe to the Houston Metropolitan Research Center newsletter, or you can view a complete calendar of upcoming events at the Houston Public Library main webpage. If you have any questions about this program or preservation in general, please contact our Texas Room Reference Services at txr.reference@houstontx.gov.